I want you guys to open the very first barber model that we had. The very first one that we created. So I want you guys to open that one, barbershop model, where we define a local random variable and look at the value of the random variable to give a tag to the customers. Save it as a new model in the same folder. And at the end of the name, put cycle time. So you guys know this is the model in which you have the cycle time. Run this model one more time. We ran it for 100 hours. Okay, here you see that when the report is generated, we have the time in system or cycle time for all the customers, no matter if they are men, women, or children. However, what if we want to know the average time that children spend in the system, the average time that men spend in the system, and the average time that women spend in the system? What if we want to calculate these cycle times, not only just for the customers in general, but also for each type of customer separately? Okay, so how we can do that? That's what we want to learn in this model. Let's assume you are in this system. Forget about simulation. In this real world, you have one pen and one piece of paper and a pen. How are you guys going to report the average time that children spend in the system, the average time that men spend in the system, and the average time that women spend in the system? So you are going to stand by the door. As soon as they come in, you're going to start have that, okay, this customer entered at this time. And then when they leave the system, you're going to look at the time and then deduct these two from each other to calculate the cycle time or the time that they have spent in the system. And then if they are women, you keep that in the, I don't know, in the container of the women's cycle time. If they are men, you keep that number in the container of men's cycle time. And if they are children, you keep that number in the container of children's cycle time. And at the end of the day, or at the end of these 100 hours of operations, you just look at average of the numbers in each container separately, and you report that. Okay, so we try to do the same thing in the simulation. So when the customers come to the system, right, each customer has a different arrival time. And when they get to the barber, and when they're done with the barber, I wanna look at the time at that point, and then say, okay, you entered at this point and you're leaving at this point. So let me look at the difference between the two, which is going to be your cycle time. So I'm basically saving the time of arrival for each customer separately for that customer. So how do you think I can do that in the simulation? What feature I can use so that I can save I can save the time of arrival of each customer just for that customer, and nothing else can overwrite it.
You just add another attribute?
We can use another attribute. I can just give another tag to these entities, which are customers. And I can call this tag, let's say, the time in. And as soon as the customers enter the system, I look at the simulation time at that point and save that time in this tag. So when the customers go through the system, each one of them carries this tag with herself or himself. And this tag contains the time that they entered the system. Okay, so we're going to do the same. Let's go to the attribute, and I'm going to define another attribute. I'm going to call it time in attribute. And this time in attribute obviously is going to, as I said, is going to get the time of the arrival of customers to the system. And the time of the arrival of customers is not integer. It's a real number. The time is a real value, is a real number. So it's not an integer value. Okay, so make sure when you define this timing and attribute that is going to save the time of the arrival of customers, make sure that you specify that it's real number and it's not integer. Okay. Then let's, okay. Okay, so we assign that attribute, we define that attribute. Now, when the customers enter the system, as soon as they enter the waiting area, I want to record the simulation time in that attribute. Okay, so right here, as soon as the customer enters in the timing attribute, I'm going to record the simulation time. For each entity, as soon as they enter, I'm going to look at the simulation time at that point and save that time in the timing attribute. How can I get the simulation time at any point of simulation?
Clock.
Clock. You guys learned that in previous session, right? Clock is the function that can catch or that can fetch the simulation time for me at any point when this line is being executed. The simulation, when the simulation gets to this line and executes clock, returns the simulation time at that point. Okay, so when an entity comes to the system, these lines of the codes are going to be executed, and right there, the simulation time is going to be we are going to get the simulation time and save it in the time in attribute. Okay, and then do the rest of the things. Generate a random variable, look at the value of the random variable, and give the tag of 1 or 2, 3, or 2 or 3 to the customers. Okay. So at this point, we have saved the time of arrival for each customer in an attribute that they carry with themselves throughout the simulation. Now, when the customer is done with the barber and the customer is leaving, that's when I need to look at the simulation time again and say that, okay, you arrive at this time, I can see it in your tag, and this is the simulation time at this point as you're done with the haircut and you're leaving. So now let me calculate your cycle time and save it in the corresponding container for men, women, or children. And at the end, report the average of the numbers in each container. Okay. So how do we do that? So when if the customer is a man, they go through the processing haircut, and then we increase or decrease a bunch of variable for work in process or so forth. Right here, I'm going to take care of what I just talked about. The function that is going to enable me to do that is a log function. It's called the log. Okay. And what does the log function do? Log function creates a container that is going to get all those cycle times for men or women or children. And I have to give a name to that container. I'm going to call that, I'm going to say that container that is going to save all the cycle times for women. I'm going to call it as men underline cycle time. Okay, make sure to put the cycle time underline between them, otherwise you get error. Or just have men cycle time all as one word. Or if you want to create space between them, put the underline, otherwise you get error. Okay. So I'm going to call that container as men cycle time, and then comma, and then name of the attribute that has the arrival time for each entity. So this line will take care of everything for me. As soon as the simulation executes this line, it's going to create a container, calls it men cycle time, that is going to save all the cycle times for men. And then as soon as the simulation sees that timing, which is the attribute that saves the time of arrival, simulation is going to look at the time at that point and then calculate the simulation time at that point minus the value in the timing, which is the time of arrival, and that becomes the cycle time for that entity for which we are executing these codes. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for women and children. So if the customer is a woman, then I'm going to log these cycle times in a different container, and I'm going to call that woman underline cycle time, comma, timing. And if they are children, I'm going to log everything in children. cycle time, comma, time in. Okay. So as you can see, the log is blue. It's the keyword. Simulation knows the word, what it means, and what the simulation should do as soon as we execute these lines. The first part is treated as the name of that log, and then it needs the name of the attribute that has the time of arrival or the start time, and then it does the rest of the calculation itself. Okay, if I want to see the results of those logs, of those averages of cycle time for men, women, and children, I go to table. At the end, you see there is logs under the other category. There's logs. I click on that, and then here I have men's cycle time, women's cycle time, and children's cycle time. So on average, men spend in the system 115 minutes, and then women 118, and children 114. And there I also see the maximum possible values and the minimum values that have happened. At some point, there has been an entity of men that has spent about 217 minutes in the system. And also at some point, we have had an entity man that has spent about 9 minutes in the system. However, the average value, which is more important, the average cycle time for men is 115 and so forth. And if I want to look at the average cycle time for all the entities, no matter what, where should I go?
To the first report or the entity team?
To the report, the time, average time in system. So that's basically cycle time in system from the point that they entered till the point that they exit. And that's 116 minutes. Now, I want you guys to calculate something for me. I want you guys to calculate average cycle time for all the entities, no matter if they are men or women or children. And I know that's exactly the number that we just showed. The simulation calculates that for us automatically. But I want you to calculate that number yourself using the log function. Calculate the average time in the system or cycle time for entities, no matter if they are men, women, or children. Yes, so to be able to do that, we can use the same attribute that we use to log the time that the customers arrive to the system. So still the timing attribute gets the time that the customers arrive to the system. And at this point, I don't care what type of customers they are. Even if I want to look at the cycle time for different type of customers, when they arrive, I don't care what type of customers they are. All I want is to know what time they arrive to the system. When they leave is the point that it matters for me. If I want to log the time of men, women, or children separately, when they leave, I have to do different logs for men, women, and children so that I can look at the averages for each one of them separately. However, if I'm not concerned about the type of customers, then all I need is the cycle time or the average time they have spent in the system. Then at the end, after I'm done with processing these entities, no matter if they're men, women, or children, then I'm going to record the time that they have spent in the system. I'm going to call it overall customer cycle time. And here, I'm going to put time in. And if I look at the results, yeah. So our overall cycle time is 116 minutes. And that's exactly the number that simulation calculated for us automatically when you did the calculation yourself too. So basically the ProModel uses this same codes and the same write-ups behind the scene to calculate these things. And now you guys are gradually learning how to do this calculation yourself because you may want to use the same method to calculate different things. So before we move on, let me mention that we can use this feature, the log feature, to calculate the time that the entities spend in the system not only just the cycle time from the point that they enter till the point that they leave, but also at any part of the system. So let's assume the customers come to a system and there are three operations: operation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they leave the system. And let's assume I want to know how long they spend in operation 3. Let's assume I want to know how long they spend in operation 2, 3, and 4. That's what I care about. I want to know what is the amount of time that they spend in operation 2, 3, and 4 total. So in that scenario, I start recording the time. I put the time in. I start recording the time as soon as they start operation 2, and then I log the time as soon as they are done with operation 4. Okay, and then when I look at the log results, when I run the simulation and look at the log results, it gives me the average of the time, that the customers spend overall for operation 2, 3, and 4. Because I start recording the time as soon as they start the operation 2, and I log it as soon as they are done with operation 4. So the difference between these two gives me the total time they spend in operation 2, 3, and 4. So you can use the log features to calculate the time the entities spend in any part of the system, not necessarily from the very start to the very end, at any part of the system if you need to.